Hey guys, tonight we begin with the wonderfully chaotic realm of the ancient Greek deities. A pantheon so mighty, so theatrical, and so emotionally unpredictable. So before you truly settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe it. Only if you genuinely appreciate what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is for you. It's always intriguing to see who's joining us across the globe. Now, dim the lights. Maybe switch on a fan for that soothing background murmur, and let's drift gently into tonight's story. Together, let's begin with the big one, Zeus, Lord of the Sky, Sovereign of Olympus, and living proof that unrestrained power thoroughly melts your concept of boundaries. Zeus was the youngest son of Cronus and Rhea. His father, like all great dads, had a tendency to swallow his offspring whole, just to avoid being overthrown. Charming, right? Luckily, Rhea saved baby Zeus by tricking Cronus with a stone wrapped in cloth, which says a lot about how observant Cronus really was. Once Zeus matured, he led a celestial uprising. He sliced open his father's belly. Freud would have written volumes and freed his siblings, Poseidon, Hades, Ischia, Hera, and Demeter. Boom. The original messy family was officially formed. After the gods triumphed over the Titans, Zeus was crowned king. He reigned over the skies, commanded thunder and lightning, and supposedly maintained cosmic balance, justice, and sacred vows. In theory, in reality, Zeus spent most of his time turning into different animals and charming anything that moved: swans, bulls, eagles, shimmering golden mist. This man had no off switch, and certainly no moral compass. Imagine the Chief Justice of your country transforming into a goose just to flirt. That's Zeus plus lightning bolts. His love life. A beautifully documented catastrophe. He married his sister, Hera, which went about as well as you'd expect. He had countless liaisons with goddesses, nymphs, mortals, and probably the occasional potted plant. The result? An unmanageable horde of half-divine children, many with deep abandonment issues, and who, by accident or design, founded entire legends. But Zeus wasn't entirely reckless. When he wasn't cheating or launching bolts at humans for offering the wrong incense, he did act like the celestial referee. He enforced promises, upheld order, and occasionally punished people for being just a little too arrogant. Which, let's be honest, takes some effort when you're Zeus. He was feared. He was admired. And he was always triggering PR disasters for Mount Olympus. Protector and predator. Judge and mischief maker. The ultimate divine contradiction. Hera is technically the goddess of marriage, family, and childbirth. Which is ironic, because her marriage is a golden chariot on fire. She's Zeus's wife, and also his sister, because of course, mythology. Their wedding was supposed to be the perfect symbol of sacred union. Instead, it became a never-ending drama, full of betrayal, vengeance, and an alarming number of mortals turned into livestock, trees, or decorative stonework. Hera is powerful. No question, she's the unquestioned queen of the gods. But that strength tends to manifest in one very distinct form. Retribution, not toward Zeus. Mind you, that'd be far too reasonable. Hera's rage is laser-focused on the women Zeus seduces, or to be fair, kidnaps, and their poor children. She once transformed a woman into a cow, cursed another to only echo back words, and tried to murder baby Hercules with a couple of snakes. That was literally his baby. Hers, no. His, Still, no. You can hardly blame her. Imagine being the goddess of marital unity, while your husband's busy inventing new species-specific pickup lines. But still, her coping strategy often involved ancient curses and intricate punishments. Therapy, unfortunately, was not a thing in ancient Greece. Yet, despite everything, Hera wasn't just a divine grudge holder. She also safeguarded women in childbirth, upheld the sacredness of marriage at least symbolically, and punished oathbreakers. Among mortals, she had temples, priests, and a fiercely loyal following. Cities like Argos and Samos revered her as a commanding force of cosmic order. In short, Hera was the one you prayed to if your husband was faithful, and the one who might send a plague if he wasn't. She's a layered contradiction, the embodiment of feminine strength in a system that routinely belittled her. Her story isn't just jealousy, it's survival. A goddess meant to represent harmony while keeping Olympus from collapsing, using only spite and ornamental rage. Poseidon was the god of the sea, earthquakes, storms, and for some mysterious reason horses, because nothing says ocean deity like a herd of galloping stallions. But hey, mythology, he was one of the three principal brothers. Zeus got the sky, Hades got the underworld, and Poseidon got everything damp, which suited him just fine. He ruled the endless oceans, commanded creatures both mesmerizing and monstrous, and wielded a massive trident. Not just a glorified pitchfork, but a three-pronged divine rage stick, capable of wiping out entire civilizations. Poseidon was worshipped and feared in equal measure. Sailors prayed to him for smooth waters. Fishermen left offerings. City planners asked his blessing before building too close to the coast, just in case it turned into beachfront property overnight. But let's be honest, Poseidon had some issues, tidal wave-sized, crashing emotional problems. He was the unpredictable uncle archetype, sometimes generous, sometimes destructive, always a bit salty. One day he'd be creating entire islands, the next drowning your barley fields, because someone forgot to mention his name during a goat sacrifice. He once struck the earth so hard with his trident that it caused an earthquake, just because he lost a city naming contest to Athena. She gave the people an olive tree. He gave them a saltwater spring. They chose olives. He chose vengeance. That's Poseidon in a clamshell. His romantic life was equally stormy. There were nymphs, mortals, and one particularly infamous situation with Medusa, which ended with her cursed and monstrous, and him walking away without a scratch. Classic, still. Poseidon wasn't just a tempest in a beard. He was a guardian of sailors, a patron of cities, and in calmer moments, a god of abundance and renewal. He was vital to Greek life, especially for a culture built around the sea. But like the ocean itself, he was always one storm away from reminding everyone who truly held the power. Hades, in contrast, was the god of the underworld. Not hell exactly, more like a vast, quiet waiting room where all souls eventually checked in for eternity. Contrary to modern pop culture, Hades wasn't evil. He wasn't even particularly harsh. He was just deeply exhausted by everything, while Zeus took the skies and Poseidon the seas. Hades drew the shortest straw and got stuck running the divine version of customer service for the deceased. He ruled over the dead with a steady, brooding authority. No lightning bolts, no dramatic entrances, no turning into swans. He just showed up, managed the afterlife, and made sure nobody slipped out the back door. His realm was called Hades too, because naming your kingdom after yourself apparently wasn't considered narcissistic back then. It had areas for different kinds of souls: Elysium for the heroic, Asphodel for the average, and Tartarus for the really unpleasant. Basically, the world's longest detention hall, and who managed it all. That's right, Hades, the gothic workaholic of Olympus. Now, about Persephone. Yes, he did kidnap her. Not ideal, certainly problematic, but because Greek mythology thrives on contradictions, they somehow evolved into a functional, strangely balanced marriage. She spent half the year with him, bringing a touch of spring to the underworld, and the other half on Earth, bringing spring itself. Less romance, more mythological. Timeshare Hades was also the original pet dad. His dog Cerberus had 3 heads, 0 chill, and absolutely no concept of obedience training. But he kept the spirits in line mostly. Unlike his brothers, Hades didn't cheat, didn't lash out, and didn't seek attention. That's probably why the ancient Greeks rarely built him temples. They were afraid he might notice. He was the quiet, grim uncle no one invited to the party, but everyone respected from a very polite distance. Athena was essentially the divine embodiment of logic in a mythological world filled with emotional meltdowns and thunderbolts. Her birth alone would give Freud an extended vacation. Zeus, after swallowing her pregnant mother, Medusa's prophecy, of course, developed a splitting headache. Instead of an aspirin, he requested a hammer to the forehead, and out sprang Athena, fully grown, fully armored, and fully unimpressed by literally everyone. From the very start, Athena made it clear she had no time for foolishness. Unlike her chaos-loving brother, Ares, Athena viewed war like a chessboard, something to be studied, calculated, and won with minimal shouting and maximum effectiveness. If Ares was a bar fight, Athena was a military briefing with charts and pie graphs. She was also the goddess of crafts, which might seem like a quirky side hustle until you realize that in her hands, weaving was war. Just ask Arachne, a mortal bold enough to challenge Athena to a weaving contest. Technically, Arachne won, but Athena, being just a touch vengeful, turned her into a spider. Moral of the story: stay humble or get ready to spend eternity spinning webs in someone's attic. Athena completely sidestepped the romantic drama that consumed most of Olympus. No seducing mortals, no questionable animal transformations, no marrying family members. She had plans, cities to protect, heroes to mentor, owls to raise Dot. She helped Odysseus make it home, guided Perseus to decapitate Medusa, and, quite possibly, edited Homer's rough drafts in her spare time. Athena is the one you'd want leading your army, managing your startup, or coaching your debate team. She didn't shout, she didn't scheme. She simply outsmarted always. Ares, on the other hand, was the Greek god of war, bloodshed, and punching first, thinking, maybe never. If Athena was war with a blueprint, Ares was war with a sledgehammer and poor life choices. He represented the messy, violent side of battle: chaotic charges, screaming soldiers, fire, panic, and someone's helmet flying through the air. When Ares showed up, things got loud, got bloody, and got very out of hand. As for personality, he wasn't exactly a favorite guest. Even his fellow gods avoided him. Zeus once called him the most detestable of all the gods. And when Zeus thinks you're the problem, well, that says a lot. Ares was arrogant. He was impulsive, and about as subtle as a flaming chariot on cobblestone. The Greeks didn't exactly admire him. They respected tactics, cleverness, and self-control. none of which Ares brought to the table. He didn't win battles with planning. He just charged in and hoped for the best. Sometimes it worked, more often it didn't. Still, he was terrifying. He wasn't just the god of war, he was also the god of fear itself. His sons, Phobos and Deimos, aka Panic and Terror. Family. Game nights must have been intense, and he did love being in the thick of the action. Sweat, blood, mayhem. It was his happy place. He also had a long affair with Aphrodite, which might sound romantic, until you remember it ended with him caught in a magical net by her husband Hephaestus, and mocked by literally every other god in the room. Ancient Greek tabloids would have thrived. In Roman mythology, Ares got a rebrand as Mars, more noble, more disciplined, and far less sweaty. But in Greece, he remained the muscle-bound embodiment of reckless destruction. Even so, Ares had his moments. In real battles, he was honored and feared. Soldiers left offerings, hoping for courage or just to be ignored by him completely. And when he wasn't breaking things, he rode a chariot pulled by fire-breathing horses, which, let's be honest, earned him at least one style point. Aphrodite was the goddess of love, beauty, desire, and romantic disasters with impressively high body counts. If you've ever seen someone fall head over heels for the absolute worst person possible, you've seen her divine influence at work. Her origin story. Well, it depends on your tolerance for mythological discomfort. In one version, she's the daughter of Zeus and Dione. In the older and significantly weirder version, she's born from sea foam after Cronus lopped off Uranus's divine anatomy and tossed it into the ocean. Yes, that's genuinely the least romantic birth story ever assigned to the goddess of romance. Aphrodite was so breathtakingly beautiful that gods and mortals alike basically forgot how to function around her. She even had a magical belt, the cestus that made her irresistible, which is slightly cheating in the dating department. Despite being the goddess of love, her own relationships were far from idyllic. She was married to Hephaestus, the hard-working god of fire and craftsmanship, but preferred the thrill of Ares, the war god. That says a lot about her taste in men. Their affair ended poorly. Hephaestus trapped them mid-romance in an enchanted net and summoned all the gods to come and take a look. Because, in ancient Greece, revenge and public humiliation were considered perfectly valid forms of conflict resolution. But Aphrodite wasn't all mischief and infidelity. She had a gentler side too. She helped young lovers, presided over ceremonies, and added beauty to a world that desperately needed it. She was the goddess people whispered to before confessing a crush, or when trying to charm their way out of something incredibly reckless. Still, she wasn't exactly peace-loving. She's the one who promised Helen of Troy to Paris, which, if you recall, started the Trojan War. And why? Because she wanted to win a divine beauty contest. An entire civilization went up in flames because Aphrodite wanted a golden apple with the words to the fairest engraved on it. She's the patron of desire, not wisdom. Beautiful, magnetic, and absolutely indifferent to your relationship boundaries. Hephaestus was the god of fire, metalwork, craftsmanship, and quite possibly the only Olympian who actually held down a full-time job, while the rest of the gods were off starting wars, flirting with mortals, or casually throwing lightning like party favors. Hephaestus was in the forge, making weapons, building palaces, muttering under his breath. His origin story, let's just say, it doesn't make for cheerful bedtime reading. In one version, he's born with a physical deformity, and Hera, disgusted by the sight of him, tosses him off Mount Olympus like a broken trinket. In another, it's Zeus who does the tossing after an especially heated argument. Either way, he plummets from heaven, lands hard, and ends up with a limp and abandonment issues the size of Crete. But Hephaestus doesn't get back into Olympus through forgiveness. He does it through engineering. He builds Hera a stunning golden throne that, surprise, traps her in place when she sits down. The gods panic. They plead with him to release her, and he agrees, but only if they let him back into the divine inner circle. Negotiation, flawless. Once reinstated, Hephaestus becomes the celestial handyman. He forges Zeus's thunderbolts, Poseidon's trident, Achilles' armor, and nearly every single glowing, flying, exploding artifact Olympus brags about. If it sparkles, hums, or detonates, chances are Hephaestus built it while working unpaid overtime, and yet, despite his brilliance, he was consistently underestimated. His wife, Aphrodite assigned, not chosen, famously cheated on him with Ares. His family, distant, at best. His co-workers, constantly breaking the things he just repaired. But Hephaestus didn't explode like Ares. He didn't plot like Hera. His revenge was measured, meticulous, and delightfully passive-aggressive. Even the net he used to catch Aphrodite and Ares mid-affair, handcrafted, artisan-grade, built for maximum mortification. Functional and poetic. He wasn't flashy. He didn't radiate charisma. But he literally built Olympus. Brick by enchanted brick. Hephaestus is the unsung laborer of the gods, patron of blacksmiths, artisans, inventors, and anyone who's ever screamed at a broken appliance and fixed it with duct tape and stubbornness. Then there's Hermes, god of travelers, merchants, thieves, and the occasional fast-talking alibi. He's the one with winged sandals, a staff that probably came with no instruction manual, and a vibe that says, "I've already made 2 deals and told 3 lies. Today." Unlike most gods, Hermes hit the ground running literally. On the day of his birth, he crawled out of his cradle, stole Apollo's cattle, invented the lyre using a tortoise shell, and was back in bed before anyone noticed something was missing. That was just day 1. Other gods take centuries to generate that kind of chaos. Hermes needed 6 hours. He's known as the messenger of the gods. But that barely scratches the surface. He didn't just deliver notes. He snuck souls into the underworld, guided heroes through enemy lands, and quite possibly invented divine express shipping. If there was a problem, Hermes was already halfway out the door, leaving behind a vague explanation and a suspicious smile. He was also the god of trade and negotiation, because clearly, the same guy managing theft should definitely be in charge of your local marketplace. Hermes stood for persuasion, adaptability, and morally flexible entrepreneurship. In short, he was the patron deity of salesmen, travelers, tricksters, and anyone who's ever tried to haggle down a price at a flea market. But he wasn't just a charming rogue. He was fiercely loyal when it mattered. He helped Odysseus outsmart Circe, and gave Perseus the enchanted gear to defeat Medusa. Hermes even escorted souls to the underworld with a surprising amount of tenderness, proving that underneath all the schemes and speed, he actually took his role seriously. He also had a signature item, the caduceus, a winged staff with 2 intertwined serpents. It's often mistaken for the symbol of medicine, which is quite ironic, considering Hermes' primary skills were speed, deception, and ignoring boundaries. If Olympus had an IT department, Hermes would be the hyperactive tech guy who solves your crisis in 2 minutes, speaks exclusively in acronyms, then vanishes, probably to optimize some cloud function that somehow involves stealing Zeus's password. He's fast, unpredictable, and entirely lovable. The god of getting things done, getting away with it, and never sticking around for follow-up questions. Demeter is the goddess of the harvest, grain, agriculture, and making the world come alive. When she's in the right mood, when Demeter is content, fields thrive, trees overflow with fruit, and the world blooms in color. When she's upset, say hello to winter, famine, and a general atmosphere of deeply disappointed plant life. She's one of the more reserved Olympians. No thunderbolts, no affairs, no spontaneous animal transformations. But don't confuse quiet with harmless. She can shut down the global food chain with a single sulk, and at one point, she did exactly that. Enter Persephone, her beloved daughter, the flower child of Olympus. One day, Persephone was out picking flowers, minding her mythological business, when the earth split open and Hades, god of the underworld and full-time kidnapper, whisked her away. Classic Greek parenting nightmare. Demeter, understandably, loses her divine composure. She roams the earth in sorrow, refusing to let a single thing grow until her daughter is returned. Crops wither, animals starve, mortals beg. Demeter's reply: no Persephone, no produce. Eventually Zeus steps in, mostly because the humans are dying. And with no humans, there are no sacrifices, which is apparently a deal-breaker. A compromise is reached. Persephone will spend part of the year with Hades and part with Demeter. And just like that, the seasons are born. Spring and summer Demeter is joyful. Autumn and winter she mourns so. Yes, one of the most crucial cycles of life is powered by divine maternal grief and seasonal emotional blackmail. Mythology at its most effective, Demeter also had a strong moral compass. She once taught humanity how to grow wheat, establish societies, and build civilization itself. Then she turned around and set a royal baby on fire because the parents interrupted her mid-ritual. There's a thin line between nurturing earth goddess and terrifying supernatural forest which dot her core. Though Demeter represents care, strength, and the sacred bond between mother and child, she brings life from the soil and can take it back with a single breath. Then there's Dionysus, the god of wine, celebration, fertility, theater, madness, and questionable life choices made after your third cup of anything. He is the divine embodiment of YOLO, wrapped in ivy, mildly tipsy, and possibly summoning a panther. His birth, well, dramatic, to say the least. Dionysus was the child of Zeus and a mortal woman named Semele. When Hera, because, of course, it was Hera, found out, she tricked Semele into asking Zeus to reveal his true divine form. Spoiler, it vaporized her. Zeus, ever the improviser, rescued the unborn Dionysus by stitching him into his own thigh and carrying him to term. Yes, thigh pregnancy. Because Greek mythology never asks whether it should, only whether it can. Dionysus grew up wandering, spreading winemaking, wild joy, and a vague sense of existential confusion wherever he went. He was followed by an unruly entourage of Satan, Maenads, and woodland mischief makers, a traveling carnival of euphoria, ecstasy, and minor property damage. But his worship wasn't just about revelry and grapes. Dionysian rituals were about release, letting go of your identity, your fears, and sometimes your clothing. The festivals of Dionysus were wild, immersive, full of masks, music, dancing under the stars, and a series of decisions you wouldn't share at brunch. Think Burning Man, but with divine wine and much, much weirder consequences. But Dionysus wasn't just fermented fun and chaotic cheer. He had a temper, a dramatic, theatrical, spotlight-stealing temper. If you mocked him, refused to honor him, or disrupted his carefully cultivated vibe, things got strange. One king who banned his cult was driven mad and ripped apart by his own people. Another turned into a dolphin. Because subtlety was not on Dionysus's resume, he didn't do light punishment. He did symbolic punishment, the kind people wrote about for centuries. Yet for all that divine flair, Dionysus was deeply compassionate, especially to the misfits, the broken, the outcast. He brought joy to the grieving, voice to the silenced, and occasionally turned people into grapevines, which probably means something profound. Or maybe he just liked grapes. Dionysus is the god of contradictions, freedom and frenzy, creativity and chaos. One moment he's blessing you with inspiration. The next, you're barefoot in a vineyard, reconsidering every life decision you've ever made. Then there's Artemis, goddess of the hunt, of the wilderness, of wild animals and moonlight. She is the divine spirit of... No, I won't explain myself. And yes, that was a warning. Bow in one hand, zero tolerance in the other. Artemis didn't need thunderbolts, seduction, or political schemes. She had accuracy, discipline, and a pack of wolves that took loyalty very seriously. Twin sister to Apollo. She entered the world with instant overachiever energy, helping deliver her brother right after her own birth. From that moment forward, she was done with men. She swore off romance, rejected marriage, and avoided emotional entanglements like they were poison ivy. Instead, she wandered forests, hunted stags, and surrounded herself with a loyal circle of maiden followers who shared her love for nature and disdain for drama. Artemis is remembered for her purity, but not the fainting Victorian kind. More like, touch me and I'll turn you into a deer kind of purity. Take Actaeon, a hunter who accidentally saw her bathing. Rather than calmly explain boundaries, Artemis turned him into a stag and let his own hounds finish the job. Lesson learned. Don't interrupt Artemis. Ever she was fiercely protective, especially of women and children. While most Olympians treated mortals like Tinder profiles or chess pieces, Artemis was their shield. If you disrespected nature, harmed the innocent, or acted like a fool in her woods, you'd learn what poetic justice really meant as goddess of the moon. Artemis was calm but sharp. She lit the night. She guided travelers both literally and metaphorically. If Apollo was the blinding sun, Artemis was the silent moonlight that watched from a distance, unblinking. She didn't need spectacle. She had presence. You didn't flirt with Artemis. You didn't challenge her. You just quietly hoped she wasn't aiming in your direction. In modern terms, she's the blueprint for the independent. Woman, fierce, free, and completely unbothered by your opinion. While the others lived in Olympus, Artemis ran with wolves. Apollo, her twin, was the god of, well, nearly everything: the sun, music, prophecy, healing, poetry, archery. Honestly, if there was a job posting, Apollo applied. If Mount Olympus had LinkedIn, his profile would crash the system. Golden hair, golden lyre, golden chariot, golden everything. He's the reason the sun crosses the sky, according to Greek myth. He literally drives it daily in a flaming chariot. No pressure if you're running late. But beneath that solar glow was a swirling mess of feelings. Apollo was dramatic, sensitive, the type to sing an original song after a breakup, then curse the person who left him. Literally, just ask Daphne. She turned herself into a tree to avoid him. Apollo, heartbroken, made her his sacred symbol and wore her leaves as a crown, because that's totally a healthy coping mechanism. He was also the god of prophecy, which means he often knew things would end badly, and still got mad when they did. He founded the Oracle of Delphi, where priestesses, fueled by divine delirium, spoke in cryptic riddles that somehow predicted everyone's fate. Customer service was interpretive. Love wasn't easy for Apollo. He chased many mortals. Most rejected him. He reacted with varying levels of poetic overreaction. When his beloved, the Spartan prince, Hyacinthus, died during a discus game, possibly from Apollo's own wild throw, he was so devastated that he turned the boy into a flower, which is sweet if you ignore the blunt force trauma. Despite all his heartbreaks, Apollo was also a healer. His son, Asclepius, became the god of medicine, and Apollo himself could cure plagues or start them, depending on how offended he was that morning. Apollo is brilliance, wrapped in fragility, light with a temper, charisma with a string section, the kind of god who'd write you a love song and then shoot you with an arrow if you didn't clap. And finally, Hestia, goddess of the hearth, of home, and of keeping things calm, which in Greek mythology is basically a miracle. She is the only Olympian who didn't cause weekly cosmic disasters. Hestia was the eldest child of Cronus and Rhea, and also the very first to be swallowed whole by her charmingly paranoid father. Later, when Zeus overthrew him, she was the last to be brought back up, which means, technically, she's both the oldest and the youngest Olympian. Yes, Greek mythology remains a carnival mirror of logic. Unlike her more excitable siblings, Hestia chose tranquility. She didn't engage in power plays, curse mortals, fall in love with bulls, or even throw passive-aggressive comments across the room. She was offered a throne on Olympus and politely handed it to Dionysus. Why? So she could tend the eternal flame and stay out of family drama. Now that's royalty. Hestia presided over the hearth, the literal and spiritual center of every home, every temple, and every city. Wherever a fire burned for warmth, for food, or for prayer, Hestia was present. In spirit, no temples in her honor, no tales of vengeance or scandal, just a soft, steady presence that quietly made everything else work. The original, unsung essential, she was also the goddess of hospitality. And in a world where food and shelter meant the difference between life and death, that made her sacred. To invoke her was to protect the flame in your home, to ensure your bread baked evenly, and, hopefully, that your in-laws would leave by sunrise. And unlike most Olympians, she didn't turn people into animals, houseplants, or metaphorical warnings. She didn't need revenge. She had a clean floor and inner peace. Thanks to her, every meal began and ended with an offering. Every city held her flame in its heart, and every prayer circle probably included someone whispering, "Thank you for not being a disaster." If the Olympian gods were a chaotic office, Zeus would be the CEO with major boundary issues, Athena the overqualified strategist, Dionysus the HR violation, and Hestia, she'd be the quiet office manager, keeping the coffee warm, the papers stacked, and the entire building from burning down while the rest argued about who set the copier on fire. Hestia reminds us that power can exist in stillness, that simplicity can hold immense value, and sometimes the most essential person is the one holding everything together in silence. Then there's Persephone, one of the most compelling figures in the entire mythos. A goddess split in two, her personality written into the seasons. She is blooming spring and fading death, life and decay, a flower crown and an iron throne. Daughter of Demeter, goddess of harvest, Persephone was born into life and abundance, a symbol of fertility, warmth, and joy. Until, as it often goes in mythology, things changed. She was picking flowers innocently, gracefully, when Hades saw her and decided, "That's my queen." No conversation, no polite proposal, just abduction straight to the underworld. Demeter, her mother, was devastated. She searched every inch of the earth, and when no one gave her answers, she shut agriculture down entirely. Crops withered, livestock starved, mortals begged. Demeter's reply was simple: no Persephone, no harvest. Eventually, Zeus stepped in, not out of paternal concern, but because the starving humans had stopped making sacrifices. Priorities, a deal was struck. If Persephone hadn't eaten anything in the underworld, she could return. But, of course, she had. 6 pomegranate seeds, just enough to legally bind her to a seasonal residency in the land of the dead, and thus the seasons were born. Spring and summer she rises, autumn and winter she descends. The ancient Greeks invented seasonal depression and gave it a backstory. But here's where it shifts. Over time, Persephone stopped being the victim. She embraced her role, not just a sad flower girl, but a sovereign, ruler, composed, unshaken, soft-spoken, and utterly powerful. She became someone mortals prayed to for mercy, for peace, for guidance through grief. She is the goddess of transformation, not just in season, but in spirit. She reminds us of the shift from innocence to maturity, from being taken to taking command. Persephone is duality itself. She walks through lilies and bones with equal grace. She is the reason flowers bloom and the reason they wither. By the time she reached adulthood, statues of Aphrodite were gathering dust, while mortals journeyed for miles just to catch a glimpse of her. Psyche's beauty wasn't simply admired, it was worshipped. Entire crowds behaved as though she were Aphrodite reborn, divinity wrapped in fragile mortal skin. People whispered that no human could look like this by accident, that surely something supernatural had walked among them. But for Psyche, the adoration rang hollow. She passed through towns and palaces like a spirit praised but untouched, honored but alone. No one approached her with genuine warmth. Men looked at her as one might study a statue, perfect, silent, distant. Even her own family, though proud, began to grow uneasy. Her sisters had married noblemen, warm homes, children laughing in courtyards, and Psyche, she remained in her gilded solitude. No suitor dared come near, a girl rumored to rival a goddess, and that, in the world of Olympus, was dangerous, because the gods did not enjoy competition. Least of all, Aphrodite, the goddess of love, watched. As her temples emptied, her altars went cold, and her name faded beneath garlands laid at a mortal girl's feet to Aphrodite. Psyche was not a maiden. She was an insult, a declaration, a challenge. But Psyche knew none of this. She wandered gardens alone, spoke to no one, never held a hand or heard a vow spoken in the dark. Her beauty had become a prison, a glass wall between her and the one thing she truly longed for, a soul that saw her not just her face. Each evening, she would stand at the window, watch the sun dissolve into the horizon, and wonder if this was her fate, to be loved by all, and held by none. No priest, no oracle, no traveler offered an answer, until one day someone did. But it wasn't a man. It wasn't a prophet, and it certainly wasn't human. It was a goddess, and she wasn't offering love. She was delivering revenge, because on Mount Olympus, beauty wasn't vanity. It was power, currency, weapon, and no one wielded it like Aphrodite. She was desire incarnate, the whisper in the dark, the divine enchantment behind every flushed cheek and stolen glance. But lately, her temples had grown silent, her statues lonely, her name barely spoken above mortal breath. Why? Because they now knelt before her. Psyche, a mortal to Aphrodite, this was no slight. It was blasphemy. She watched from her celestial throne as envy rotted into fury. She had punished kings for less. She had burned cities over smaller insults. How dare a human girl steal her worshippers? How dare she outshine the goddess of beauty herself? And so Aphrodite summoned her son Eros, not just the god of love, but the master of chaos, of misplaced passion, of doomed desire, of rulers who fell for thieves and queens who loved their enemies. His arrows did not ask permission. They shattered logic, obliterated loyalty, and occasionally toppled entire empires. Her command was simple: make Psyche fall in love with the most hideous, vile creature to walk the earth. Something monstrous, something grotesque, something no soul could ever truly love. Let her feel mockery. Let her suffer. In the name of divine justice, Eros, loyal son, strapped his bow and quiver across his back and descended from Olympus under the shroud of moonlight. He found Psyche asleep, her breathing slow, her skin catching the candlelight like water catching stars. She was beautiful, too beautiful, and Eros, who had pierced 1,000 hearts, felt something strange in his own. This wasn't right. This wasn't the plan. Still, he reached for an arrow, but in his hesitation, his hand slipped. The arrow grazed his skin, just a single drop, but it was enough. The god of love had just fallen victim to his own magic. In that heartbeat, everything changed. Eros would no longer be his mother's weapon. He would become Psyche's unseen guardian, her secret shadow. But neither of them could begin to imagine the price Olympus would demand for such forbidden affection. And Aphrodite, she would not forgive. By the time Psyche stirred, Eros was gone, vanished into the wind, leaving behind nothing but the faint warmth of something unspoken. The wound from his own arrow was still warm against his skin. He had pierced countless hearts, toppled dynasties, and ignited passions across the ages, but never had he been caught in the very web he spun. Now, with every beat of his heart, he felt something unfamiliar, a longing he couldn't name, a need to protect her, to shelter her from the brutal gaze of Olympus. But protection always required sacrifice. He couldn't tell her the truth. If Aphrodite discovered his betrayal, worse, if she knew he had fallen in love, there would be no forgiveness, not for him, not for Psyche. So Eros made a quiet vow. He would love her from the shadows, silently, completely. Meanwhile, Psyche's life had grown stranger by the day. No suitors came. No songs were sung. Her beauty, once her crown, now felt like a curse. Whispers passed from house to house, that she had offended the gods, that her punishment was near. Her father, desperate and afraid, consulted the oracle of Apollo. The answer returned was colder than marble. She shall not wed a mortal. She will marry a monster, a creature feared even by the gods. Dress her as a bride. Take her to the mountaintop. There her fate awaits. Her mother wept. Her sisters cried out. But Psyche remained motionless, as if she were already carved in stone. A monster that was her future. Not choice, not tenderness, just surrender. Still, she agreed, not from bravery, but from quiet resignation. She had been adored like a goddess, but never once held like a woman. Perhaps this monstrous fate was simply the balance owed above her. Eros watched, his heart a knot of guilt and panic. He had meant to shield her, but the gods had spun a web he could no longer untangle. If he revealed himself, his mother would know. If he stayed silent, Psyche would be lost. So he crafted a plan, a secret, a sanctuary, a palace hidden from time and light, veiled in illusions and woven from shadows. He would love her not as a god, but as a presence, a whisper, a comfort in the dark. He would never show his face, never speak his name, and above all, he would never tell her the truth, because if she knew who he truly was, everything would crumble. Even the god of love was afraid of being unloved. The wind arrived at dusk, gentle but strong. It lifted Psyche from the mountaintop like a breath. She had expected jagged rocks, the stench of a beast's den, the sound of fangs in the dark. Instead, silence. Strange, surreal silence. When she opened her eyes, she stood in a meadow glowing with light. Each flower shimmered with a color no human eye had named. A path of polished stone curved ahead, leading to the impossible, a palace, vast and luminous. Its pillars glowed like moonlight on water. Its halls whispered her name without words. Psyche stepped forward, not with fear, but with quiet wonder. She crossed the threshold, expecting dread, and found peace. Invisible hands guided her gently. Warm water bathed her fingers. Robes of silk touched her shoulders. Plates of fragrant food appeared without. A sound, no footsteps, no servants, just presence. At night, a voice deep, gentle, and kind spoke to her from the shadows. Do not be afraid, you are safe. This is your home. It was him, her unseen husband, the one the oracle had foretold. But there were no claws, no monstrous growls, just a voice. And strangely, she was not afraid. He never showed his form, not even under starlight, but each night he joined her in the velvet hush of the bedchamber. He touched her face as if she were made of dreams. He whispered laughter in her ear, and by sunrise he was gone. She was falling, falling without seeing, loving without knowing. Every word he said left her longing for more. But always, always, he begged one thing: never try to see me. One night, wrapped in moonlight and curiosity, she asked softly, "Why?" The voice grew tight. "If you see me, I must leave you forever." So she obeyed. But the mystery settled heavier each day. How could someone so gentle, so present, be the monster the oracle had warned about? Why must love hide its face? And why, when she whispered his name, did he never speak hers? Psyche told herself it didn't matter, that love did not require faces, that intimacy could live in shadow. But the human heart is an inquisitive thing, and doubt once planted, never, remains buried for long, especially when family comes to visit, especially when sisters arrive carrying poison disguised as affection. It had been weeks or perhaps months. Time moved differently in a palace, built of illusion and silence. Psyche had known peace, warmth, laughter, luxury, love, but also solitude. No faces, no names, no truths, just a voice in the dark, and shadows that brushed her skin like breath. Then one morning, his voice changed. "Sorrow will follow if you see them," he said. "See who?" she asked. "Your sisters. They come speaking of love, but they bring ruin." Psyche's heart cracked. She missed them, their teasing, their laughter, even their jealousy. They were her last tether to the girl she had once been. Before gods and mystery and unseen husbands, she begged, "Please, let me see them, just once." Eros hesitated, but he could never deny her. He agreed with one warning: do not let their words destroy what we've built. They will try, they will twist. You must not listen. And so the winds the same. Winds that once carried Psyche from the mountain now brought her sisters to the garden gate. They arrived and were stunned. Psyche was not only alive, she was radiant, clothed in silks finer than royalty. Her skin glowed like moonlight on water. They embraced her with forced smiles and laughter too tight around the edges. "Where is your husband?" one asked. Psyche smiled. "He comes only at night. I've never seen his face." They froze. "You've never seen him?" She nodded. "He says I must never look." The other gasped. "What if he's hideous? What if he's a monster? What if he's using you?" Their voices dripped with concern. But underneath, something darker pulsed. The old rivalry still flickered now, fueled by envy and sharpened with doubt. "He keeps you hidden, blind, dependent. Is that love or a cage?" And there the seed took root. They saw it and smiled. As they left, they kissed her cheeks and whispered, "Just one lamp. One night look. If he loves you, what harm can truth do?" Then they vanished, carried off on the same winds that had once brought her joy. But now, Psyche was shaken, not from fear, but from curiosity. That night, she could not sleep. She lay beside him, wrapped in silk, his arms gently curled around her, his breath warm against her neck. But her thoughts were louder than love. Her sister's words repeated, a quiet chant. "What if he's a monster? What if he's not who you think?" She had trusted blindly, given herself completely to a voice in the dark. But was that trust? Or was it surrender? She rose, silent as snow. Her bare feet kissed the cold floor. In her hand, a bronze oil lamp, its flame already lit. Her heart pounded as she approached. Her hands trembled as she leaned in. And when the light touched his face, she gasped. Not a beast, not a trickster god. A man, radiant beyond words. Golden curls spilled across the pillow. His lips, soft in sleep, and folded on his back. Wings, feathered, divine, folded like secrets. This was Eros, the god of love, and he had chosen her. Her eyes filled with tears, not from fear, but from remorse. He had trusted her, warned her, loved her, and she had doubted. She leaned in closer, to kiss him, to whisper an apology before the flame could flicker out. But fate, as it often is, was unkind. A single drop of hot oil fell from the lamp and touched his bare shoulder. He awoke not in fury, but in pain. His wings flared wide, his eyes filled with sorrow, his voice hollow. "You broke your promise," he said quietly. "You trusted fear, more than love. I'm sorry, Psyche whispered, falling to her knees. I just wanted to know. Eros stepped back, his glow fading. Now you do. And with that, he vanished into the darkness. The palace collapsed behind him. The invisible world they had shared, unraveling like mist. Psyche was left alone on a barren hillside. The lamp still warm in her hand, her heart shattered. She had seen the god of love, and lost him, not to prophecy, but to doubt. She wandered, barefoot and broken, across a world that now felt colder. The gardens were gone, the silks, the laughter, the voice that once lulled her to sleep vanished. The sky offered no answer, the earth no comfort, only sorrow remained. Each step was heavier than the last. She called his name in forests, in rivers, even in dreams. But there was no reply. Eros had disappeared, not from Olympus, but from her. In desperation, Psyche returned to her father's home, but the palace that once adored her now whispered rumors. Her sisters, triumphant in her pain, claimed she had married a monster and lost everything. No. One believed her tale of gods and wings and hidden love. So she left again, not in shame, but in purpose. She would find Eros, no matter how far she had to go. No matter what wrath she faced, even if it meant standing before Olympus itself. But mortals don't simply walk into the heavens. So she sought the only one who could. Opened the path, the one who had started it all. Aphrodite, yes, Psyche was afraid. The goddess had every reason to despise her. But if Eros still loved her, if there was even a flicker of hope, then Psyche would face divine wrath for one chance at redemption. She found Aphrodite not in a golden temple, but in a private garden. Surrounded by mirrors, the goddess stared at her reflection, as though searching for flaws that weren't there. When Psyche approached, Aphrodite didn't turn. I warned you once, she said coldly, and still you touched what was mine. Psyche knelt. I love him, Aphrodite laughed. You love him? You mean the son you betrayed, the god you doubted? I was foolish, Psyche admitted, but I will do anything to earn back his trust. Aphrodite finally turned, her eyes sharp as blades. Anything. Psyche nodded. Without hesitation, the goddess smiled, but it was not warm. Then you will suffer, you will be tested, and perhaps at the end of your pain, you'll be worthy of my son. Thus began a trial, not of strength, but of devotion, and Psyche would have to face it alone. Aphrodite didn't wait. Her beauty was legendary, but her cruelty, when provoked, was just as divine. If Psyche wanted even the chance to see Eros again, she would have to prove her love through a series of impossible tasks. The first challenge seemed deceptively simple. Aphrodite led her to a vast storeroom where mountains of seeds poured across the floor. Barley, millet, lentils, poppy, wheat, beans, an endless swirl of color and confusion. By nightfall, Aphrodite said with a sigh, separate them. Every grain, every seed, each into its proper pile. Fail, and you'll never see my son again. And with that, she left, humming. Psyche stared at the mountain of seeds. Even with 100 hands, it would take days. But she knelt anyway, and began seed by seed. Her fingers trembling, her eyes already blurring. Time slowed. Minutes felt like hours. She wasn't even close, but the gods are always watching, and so are their creatures. Unseen by Psyche, a line of ants had been watching. Not ordinary ants, but sacred ones, beloved by Demeter. Perhaps they pitied her. Perhaps they were moved by love. Suddenly movement. 100 tiny bodies swarmed forward. They became living rivers, dividing the seeds with impossible precision. Barley to one side, lentils to another, millet in perfect pyramids. It was as if nature itself bent time to help her. When Aphrodite returned at dusk, she expected failure. Instead, she found perfection. Her eyes narrowed. "You had help," she hissed. Psyche bowed her head. "I did what I could." Aphrodite's lips twitched. Somewhere between fury and surprise. She hadn't expected the girl to succeed. Not like this. Not with grace, but no matter. There were more trials ahead. Harder, deadlier. This was only the beginning. The goddess warned, "If you want to see Eros again, you'll need more than luck." And Psyche, aching, exhausted, but still standing, simply said, "I'll do whatever it takes," because love, real love, was worth more than comfort or pride. And Psyche's battle had only just begun. She barely had time to rest before Aphrodite handed her the second task. This task was crueler than the last. "See that river down there?" Aphrodite asked, pointing to a winding stream that shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. "It runs beside a meadow where wild rams graze. Their wool is spun from gold. Bring me a tuft of it, just a handful, and do try not to die." She smiled and disappeared. Psyche was left, not with a request, but a sentence. These were not gentle creatures. The golden rams were sacred, their eyes wild, their horns sharp as spears. They glittered like treasure, but guarded it with fury. Still, Psyche descended the hillside. She crouched by the reeds, heart hammering, watching the beasts roam. Their hooves cracked stone. Their growls echoed, low and violent. There was no way she could enter the field during daylight. No way to survive. She dropped to her knees. Tears stung her eyes. Her resolve unraveling. But again, the world watched. A whisper rustled through the grass. A voice like wind sliding between reeds. It was a spirit of the river, ancient, bound to the water. "Do not enter the field while the sun is high," the spirit murmured. "The rams rage under daylight, but at dusk they rest, wait, and gather their wool from the brambles where it's caught. No beast will miss it." Hope returned. Psyche waited and waited. As twilight fell, the golden rams slipped into the trees, their fury cooled by shadow. She crept forward, careful, silent, and found tufts of gold snagged in thorns and bark dot by moonlight. She gathered the fleece and returned. Aphrodite narrowed her eyes at the shimmering handful. "You live, again," she said, voice taut with disbelief. Psyche said nothing. No pride, no gloating, just quiet strength. Because love, true love, had taught her what even gods forget. Courage does not scream. It endures. And Aphrodite was not finished. But neither was Psyche. The goddess was growing irritated. This mortal girl had passed trials meant to crush her armed only with will and unexplainable favor. Her smile faded, replaced now by calculation. And so, for the third task, Aphrodite gave her something worse. "Fetch me water," she said. "Not from a stream, not from a spring, but from the river Styx." Psyche paled. The Styx was not a river. It was a threshold, a border between life and death. Its waters were cursed, untouchable, lethal. Even gods feared it. Mortals never survived it. Still, Psyche nodded. Her path took her to the edge of a cliff. So steep it felt carved by giants below. the sticks, it churned like liquid obsidian. No current. Just coils, a serpent made of memory. The air shimmered with the wails of forgotten souls. Worse still, it was guarded. Winged beasts circled the banks, shrieked at movement, and shredded intruders without pause. There was no path, no hope. She collapsed beneath a ledge, clutching the empty vial Aphrodite had placed in her hands. Just a sip, she had said, enough to prove you tried. Then a shimmer, a hum dot from a crack in the rock emerged. A golden eagle, massive, radiant, eyes sharp with ancient knowing, sent by Zeus himself. It said nothing, just took the vial and soared. The winged guardians screamed, but did not attack. Even death respects Olympus. Moments later, the eagle returned, the vial now full, its liquid black and gleaming, heavy with forbidden power. Psyche didn't question the gift. Perhaps Eros had once helped Zeus. Perhaps even immortals respected endurance. She returned to Aphrodite and placed the sealed vial in her hand. No words, no reaction, only silence. But the goddess knew Psyche had passed again, and now only one task remained, a journey even gods avoid. Aphrodite's voice was colder than the Styx itself. For your final trial, she said, you will descend into Hades. There, you will beg Queen Persephone for a box of her beauty, a gift for me. I'm feeling rather tired. Your existence exhausts me. It was a death sentence. Even the boldest mortals feared the underworld. No living soul entered and returned, unchanged. But Psyche, no longer hesitant, simply bowed her head. If the path to Eros led through shadow, then shadow would not stop. Her, guided by whispers, some say Demeter, others, silent spirits, she found a cave, a wound in the earth. She carried 2 coins for Corin, and cakes of barley for Cerberus. Each step down stole the warmth from her bones, not fire, but silence. The souls she passed were barely echoes, memories, drifting without form. At the river, Charon took her payment and ferried her through water thick with grief. When Cerberus snarled, she fed him the cakes. He quieted beyond him. Persephone waited on her obsidian throne. You come for beauty, the queen said, not unkindly, but at what cost? I don't want it for myself, Psyche replied. I must deliver it to Aphrodite. Persephone nodded. Perhaps she too remembers how love unravels us. She handed Psyche a small, sealed box, plain, unmarked, but unbearably heavy. Do not open it, she warned. It is not meant for your eyes. Psyche thanked her and turned to leave. The journey back was quiet, but temptation is never silent. The box pulsed in her hands. It called just a peek, she thought. What harm could it do? She told herself no, again and again. But doubt, as before, does not sleep. What if this beauty could make me worthy again? What if this was the key? The surface was near. Her heart raced, her fingers twitched, and as daylight returned to her face, for the first time in days, she opened the box, and darkness devoured her. It wasn't beauty, it wasn't light. It was sleep, not gentle sleep, but the deathless slumber of the underworld crafted by Persephone, not for Aphrodite's vanity, but to guard her own throne. Psyche didn't scream. She didn't cry out. She simply dropped. Her body fell softly onto the grass, at the threshold between life and death. The box lay beside her, her limbs stilled, her breath silenced. She wasn't dead, But she wasn't alive either, held in eternal pause, frozen by her own longing. And that might have been the end of Psyche. But love has a way of surviving even death, far away. In Olympus, Eros had not forgotten her. His wounds had healed, but his heart never. He had stayed away, obeying his mother. But he saw her, he felt her, he had watched her face every trial, not with power, but with devotion. And when he learned she had entered the underworld for him, he knew this was no ordinary girl. This was a queen. He defied his mother. He tore through the skies, wings blazing, clouds splitting beneath his flight, until he found her. There, on the hillside, still pale, like marble kissed by twilight, he fell to his knees. He didn't sob, he raged, with love too vast for words. He sealed the cursed box and set it aside. Then, without hesitation, he leaned in and kissed her. Not magic, not a spell, just a kiss, a vow, a memory, a plea, and her eyes fluttered open. She gasped. The slumber lifted. Her hands reached for him before words could form. "Eros," she whispered. "You came back. I never left," he said. "I never stopped loving you." And he held her, as though the entire sky could fall around them and it wouldn't matter. And in that moment, all Olympus watched, some amused, some furious, but all silent. For even the god of love had met his match. Their reunion shook the heavens. Eros had disobeyed Aphrodite. Psyche had defied death. Together they had crossed the boundary between mortal and divine, between fate and choice. Such love was dangerous. Aphrodite stormed the court of the gods, her rage louder than thunder. "This mortal," she shouted, "has insulted the gods. She's broken sacred law. She's corrupted my son. She must be erased." But the gods hesitated. They had seen Psyche's journey, watched her rise, watched her endure. She had loved like none of them had dared to love, and so they turned to Zeus. The king of gods sat still, lightning in one hand, fate in the other. He had seen it all. Her doubt, her courage, her fall, and her rise finally. He spoke. "There is power," he said, "in a love that survives." Aphrodite began to protest, but he silenced her with a glance. "You tested her," he said. "She passed, more than any mortal before her. She is not unworthy of Olympus. She is the proof that even mortals can love like gods." Then he turned to them, Eros and Psyche, hands clasped, eyes full. "You want to be together forever?" They nodded. "Then so be it." With a flick, Zeus summoned a goblet. "Ambrosia, the drink of immortals." He held it out to Psyche. "Drink," he said, "and you will no longer be mortal. Your heart will beat with eternity, but your trials will remain, as do ours. That's what makes us gods." Psyche took the cup. Her fingers steady she drank. Warmth spread through her, not fire, but bloom. Her senses opened. Her heart slowed, then deepened. And just like that, she was divine. No longer mortal, no longer less. Eros took her hand, and in front of Olympus, they were declared husband and wife. For once, love did not end in tragedy. It was crowned. The moment Psyche drank the ambrosia, her transformation was complete. Not just in body, but in soul. Her skin shimmered with the glow of eternity. Her eyes, once filled with tears, now reflected constellations. The gods who had once doubted, her who had mocked her mortal lineage, now gazed in silence. For the first time in Olympus's long memory, a mortal had earned her place not by lineage, but by love. She was no longer Psyche the girl, or Psyche the beautiful. She was Psyche the immortal, a goddess not of perfection, but of perseverance. Even Aphrodite, who had cursed her, could no longer deny what stood before her. A woman who had faced trials, temptation, death, and still chosen love. Still, Aphrodite was slow to forgive. But Eros, her son, her mirror, and now Psyche's husband, stepped forward. "She is no rival to your beauty, mother," he said gently. "She is something else entirely, the soul that knows love." And in that moment, the tension softened. Not fully, but enough. Aphrodite did not speak, but silence was surrender. Zeus rose, his voice like thunder wrapped in stars. "She shall be known as the goddess of the soul, Psyche." Her name in Greek meant both soul and breath, of life, and she had become both. A great feast was held across Olympus. Nectar flowed in rivers. Stars spun in dance. Even the fates, who had once whispered her doom, now smiled at her legacy. Psyche stood beside Eros, no longer hesitant, no longer small. She was divine, his equal. Together, they looked over the skies above and the mortal world below. Guardians of love, guardians of the soul's journey, and from their union a daughter was born. Hedone, goddess of pleasure and delight. Joy incarnate, the child of soul and love. Where once Psyche walked through thorns and shadows, she now danced in starlight. Not because she was flawless, but because she had fallen and risen. She was proof that even mortals, even the broken-hearted, can reach the divine. One step, one trial, one act of love at a time, and so, the story of Eros and Psyche did not end in tragedy. It became something greater. Not myth, but truth. A truth whispered across centuries. Love, real love, is not easy. It breaks, it bleeds, it wavers. But when it survives, it becomes eternal. Psyche's journey began with beauty, a curse she never asked for. She was worshipped by strangers, envied by her sisters, used by gods, punished for being loved, then punished again for loving. But she never stopped trying. Even when her heart cracked, when her faith wavered, she kept walking. And Eros, god of love, he learned too, that love is not a weapon, not a game, not a secret. In the dark it is light, yes, but only when faced with honesty, together. They taught even Olympus a lesson it had long forgotten. Love does not belong only to gods. It belongs to anyone willing to fight for it in temples. Across Greece, lovers would whisper prayers, not just to Aphrodite, but to Psyche. Her name before weddings, before births, and before final breaths. Because she wasn't just a goddess, she was a reminder that the soul can survive despair, that love, when lost, can return, and that no matter how deep the underworld, no matter how impossible the path, the heart knows the way back. Today, long after temples fell and empires vanished, her story remains in the word Psyche, meaning soul. In psychology, the study of that soul, and in every tale where love is tested and triumphs, Eros and Psyche live on, not in marble, but in us. Every time we choose trust over fear, forgiveness over pride, and love over silence, we walk their path, and perhaps, like them, we become a little more divine. Her beauty was not loud, nor did it beg for praise. It simply existed, like sunlight filtering through ancient stone. Her hair glimmered like strands of midnight silk. Her eyes held the calm of oceans moments before the storm. And her presence, though soft-spoken, unsettled kings and gods alike. She was born into a family of monsters, a lineage feared and revered in equal parts. Her sisters, Steno and Euryale, were immortal and wild, fierce and unbreakable by design. But Medusa, she was different. She alone was mortal. She alone could die. And perhaps that made her even more precious. Yet Medusa sought no crown, no lover, no seat beside the divine. She chose something rarer, devotion as a young woman. She dedicated herself to Athena, the virgin goddess of wisdom, of warfare, and restraint. In a marble temple carved into the cliffs above a restless sea, Medusa lit incense before the dawn, swept the sacred floors, and whispered prayers no one else could hear. She took the vows of silence, of purity, of sacred loyalty, not by force, but by choice. To her, Athena was not just a deity, but an ideal, untouchable, unshakable, above the chaos of human want, and in time, even the worshippers began to whisper. Medusa, they said, had become the mirror of the goddess herself. They stole glances while pretending to pray. They marveled, they envied, they remembered, but beauty, even within the walls of a temple, is never safe. Word of her grace traveled far beyond the cliffs, through cities, forests, and finally into Olympus itself, and with it, danger followed. Desire, in the realm of gods, often wore a divine face, and admiration blurred quickly into possession. It was not Athena who watched her, nor Artemis, nor Apollo. It was Poseidon, god of the sea, stormbringer, tamer of monsters, wielder of hunger. While Medusa guarded her vows, Poseidon's gaze grew sharper. He did not long for her like a muse. He hunted her like a prize, not for her beauty, but for her restraint. The more she served, the more he desired. And when the tide was high and the temple silent, he emerged. Poseidon did not knock. Gods rarely do. He entered Athena's sanctuary, dragging the scent of brine and thunder, his trident left behind, but his hunger very present. Medusa turned, expecting incense or silence. Instead, she found a god in shadow. She called out to Athena. No answer. She ran. But temples are not built for escape, and there, beneath the cold marble gaze of the goddess she adored, the god of seas took what was never his to claim. It was not passion, not love, not fate. It was violence. When it ended, Poseidon vanished. Only silence remained. Salt on the floor, tears on her skin, and shame beneath the divine statue that had once felt like home. Medusa remained, curled in broken stillness, waiting for judgment, for compassion, for a voice to say this was not her fault. But gods are not always just, and goddesses, least of all Athena, returned to the desecrated temple and saw the sea's trail and the scent of violence in the air. Her fury was swift, but not toward Poseidon, toward Medusa, whether from denial, divine pride, or the brutal weight of myth. Athena chose punishment over pity. The mortal, she claimed, had defiled the temple. Whether willing or not was irrelevant. Purity had been broken, so punishment must follow. In the stories told, power protects itself, and Medusa, once sacred, would now become a warning. Athena's temple floor was still damp with salt when the goddess passed her judgment. Medusa knelt, silent, still, hoping for grace. But Athena's eyes held no mercy. They burned with fury, not at the sea god who had defiled her sanctuary, but at the girl who bore the aftermath, to Athena, whose temple stood for order, reason, and restraint. There could be no forgiveness. Gods do not apologize, and temples, Never forget, the punishment therefore had to be symbolic and eternal. Athena descended from her marble pedestal, her form shimmering with divine authority. She stood over Medusa, trembling, confused, still clinging to hope, still waiting for mercy from the goddess she had adored, but mercy was not what she received. Athena's voice cracked through the air like thunder in a sealed tomb. You have brought disgrace into my sanctuary. Let all the world see what becomes of beauty that dares invite ruin. With a single godlike motion, she placed her fingers against Medusa's forehead. The transformation was swift and merciless. Golden hair became serpents, twisting, writhing, hissing like mocking prayers. Her skin lost its warmth. Her breath grew cold. Her once-kind eyes became weapons, not against enemies, but against everyone. One glance turned any living thing into silent stone. This was no shield. It was no gift. It was not protection. It was exile. A curse disguised as defense. Medusa screamed, but her voice no longer belonged to a girl. Her tears evaporated before reaching her cheeks. Her own reflection, once so gentle, shattered mirrors into dust. Worse still, she could never look upon another soul without destroying it. Athena did not cry. She did not flinch. She merely watched as the girl who had once whispered prayers became a figure feared by gods and mortals alike. The temple doors closed, and Medusa, no longer welcome in heaven or earth, ran. She cried out, but her cries echoed unanswered through the empty hills. No home, no temple, no sisters, no goddess, just footsteps and the trail of stone she left behind and high above. On the cliffs of Olympus, Athena returned to her throne, unmoved. In the eyes of the gods, punishment need not be just, only permanent, and Medusa's new face would outlast memory itself, banished, condemned. She fled to the wilderness alone. Her curse turned every creature she met to stone. Birds mid-flight, foxes in the brush, even small insects that caught her gaze became lifeless statues. No one followed her. She wandered across forgotten lands, beyond the reach of mortals, beyond the mercy of gods. And there, at the edge of the known world, she found an island, bleak, wind-ravaged, abandoned. She built no shelter. What was a roof to someone who no longer dreamed? What were walls to someone whose enemies had once worn halos? She stepped into a cave, already half filled with statues. Were they warriors? Monsters? Fellow outcasts? No one knew. No one returned. Here her second life began, not as a priestess, not even as a victim, but as something else entirely, a being shaped not by evil, but by betrayal. The girl who had once believed in justice, in prayers, in purity, in loyalty, had died on Athena's temple floor. What remained was not a monster. It was a woman haunted, but awake. Her serpents whispered to her, not in words, but in instinct. They warned of movement, of swords, of trespassers. Her hair had become her guardians, her eyes her sentence, her soul a faint, flickering ember of what once was. She etched shapes into the cave walls, temples, hands, faces, memories. Sometimes she carved her sisters. Other times she forgot their names entirely. And still the heroes came, drawn by tales of a cursed maiden, or tempted by glory. They believed she was evil, that slaying her would earn them fame, songs, immortality, but none of them returned, and they underestimated her, not just her power, but her pain. And yet, with each death, With each hero turned to stone, Medusa felt something inside her shift. Not her humanity. That still remained, but it was fading, quietly, like a flame left too long in the wind. The gods had already turned away, and so too had the world bought far from her cave, in the cities and temples of Greece. Her name began to change, no longer whispered in mourning. It passed from mouth to mouth like a warning, distorted, retold, rewritten. Medusa, the Gorgon. Medusa, the cursed temptress. Medusa, whose gaze turned men to stone. Her past, a devoted priestess. A mortal girl who once served the gods, was forgotten. Buried beneath myth, in its place rose the story of a monster. A creature with serpents for hair, whose eyes held the wrath of the underworld. They didn't speak of Poseidon. They didn't mention Athena's judgment. The gods' roles were edited out, smoothed over by priests and poets who preferred their gods spotless and their monsters clearly marked. Children were told, "Behave or Medusa will come in the night." Soldiers carved her face onto their shields, not to honor her, but to mock her. Her image, snarling, twisted, was etched into pottery, painted onto temple walls. A symbol of terror, used by the very gods who had exiled her. Medusa, hidden in exile, could feel the weight of their stories. She had never asked to be feared. She had only tried to survive. And survival, to those in power, is often seen as defiance. On the mainland, some remembered differently. Old women in remote villages left offerings near cave mouths. They whispered that Medusa protected women who had been hurt. They didn't fear her. They pitied her. They called her the guardian of the wronged. But those voices were soft, and the roar of hero myths drowned them out. Medusa remained alone, unaware of how deeply her name had split. Monster to some, martyr to others. What she did? No was this. They would keep coming. Men in polished armor. Men with swords and smiles and stories of glory. Men who never cared who she once was, only what she had become. And somewhere, a new challenger was already being born. While Medusa's legend spread like wildfire, a boy named Perseus was born in a tower of silence. His mother, Dano, had been locked away in a bronze prison by her father. King Acrisius, desperate to stop a prophecy that her son would one day bring about his death. But the gods do not obey mortal walls. Zeus came to her not with kindness, not with consent, but as golden rain, a shimmer that slipped past locks and warnings. And from that divine violation, Perseus was born. When the king discovered the child, he dared not kill the son of Zeus. Instead, he sealed mother and infant into a wooden chest and cast them into the sea. A quiet execution wrapped in cowardice, but the sea, ruled by Poseidon, did not drown them. It carried them to the island of Seriphos, where a kind fisherman found them. On the shore, Dano raised Perseus in hiding, quietly, carefully. She never spoke Zeus's name. She never told her son what kind of god had fathered him. Years passed. Perseus grew strong, sharp-eyed, but untested, until one day, a different kind of danger came. King Polydex of Seriphos desired Dano, but Perseus stood in his way, feigning generosity. The king invited Perseus to a grand feast. Each guest was to bring a gift. Perseus, young and proud, had nothing. Polydex smiled, mocking him. "Then bring me the head of Medusa," he said. The room erupted with laughter. It was meant to humiliate. But Perseus, wounded by pride and unaware of the truth behind the name, accepted. The gods watched. Athena, perhaps still carrying guilt, saw opportunity, not justice, not mercy, balance. She and Hermes came to Perseus in dreams, offering gifts, winged sandals, to carry him through the sky, a polished shield, bright as a mirror, an adamantine sword forged in silence, and the helm of Hades, a gift of invisibility. All the tools to kill what they had created, but no gift comes without purpose. And Perseus, he had been chosen, not just to slay a monster, but to complete a story, a myth that had not begun with him, but with a girl alone in a temple, praying to gods who never listened. Perseus set out, divine tools in hand, a king's challenge echoing in his mind. But Medusa's island was not marked on maps. Not even the gods could see its shore to find it. He sought the three ancient sisters, older than memory, who shared one eye and a single, weathered tooth. They lived between light and nightmare. They whispered secrets the gods had long forgotten. He did not beg, he did not bargain, he waited. And when the eye passed from one gnarled hand to another, he snatched it away. "Tell me," he said, "or remain blind forever," they hissed. But they answered, a distant isle, past broken cliffs and windswept silence, a place where birds do not sing, and statues line the shore like fallen prayers. And so he flew, sandals whispering against the sky, carrying with him not just weapons, but a prophecy. In his mind, he saw himself triumphant, returning with a head, a kingdom silenced, his mother safe, his name sealed in legend. What he didn't see was the truth. The gods had prepared him for glory, but not for grief. They hadn't told him the cave was filled with stone men who once called themselves heroes. They hadn't told him that. Medusa's gaze was not cruel, only cursed, or that beneath the serpents was still a face shaped by devotion, not destruction. The winds howled as he crossed the sea, not as warning, but as mourning. But Perseus heard only silence, a silence the gods knew well, because when you make a monster, the last thing you want is for someone to hear her speak. When he landed, the world went still. No breeze, no birds, only stone. Hundreds of statues, faces frozen, mouths caught mid-scream, but not in rage, in realization, as if in their final breath they had seen her for what she truly was. Perseus stepped quietly, sword sheathed, mirror raised, a silent intruder in a forgotten world. Athena had warned him, use the reflection, do not look directly, be swift. But she had not warned him that sorrow would fill the air, or that he would find her sleeping. Medusa lay curled on a bed of stone, not a beast, not a threat, just a woman resting alone, her arms tucked around herself like a child, her face fragile. In the mirrored light, beautiful still, the serpents slept with her, silent guardians, whispering dreams only they could hear. Perseus hesitated. This was not the monster from the stories, not the snarling demon painted on shields. This was someone left behind, forgotten, cursed, alone. But the gods had given him a mission, and men are often more loyal to stories than to truth. He remembered his mother. He remembered the Giars. He remembered the promise of honor. He raised the sword. A serpent stirred. Medusa's eyes fluttered. She did not scream. She did not strike. She barely breathed. And in that breathless moment, Perseus struck. The blade whispered through the air, and the silence that followed was not triumph. It was surrender. Her head fell, softly, into the bronze-lined SATCH And the island exhaled, not with relief, but with grief. The curse was broken, or so he thought. Because you can end a life, but you cannot end a story. Perseus didn't linger. He couldn't. With sandals blessed by Hermes, he rose into the clouds. But the weight he carried was more than divine steel. It was guilt. It was memory. It was something alive. The head still pulsed with strange power. The snakes twitched, tongues flickering, sensing the world beyond the leather walls. Her eyes, unblinking, still open, capable of turning gods and men to stone. Perseus never dared look again, not even once. He had been given a weapon, but he began to wonder at what cost. Far below, the sea stirred. Dark waves hissed with ancient unrest. Poseidon felt the fracture. Athena watched in silence, and the fates they began to whisper. He pressed on, focused on glory, on revenge. On home, he imagined the king falling, his mother free, his name immortal. But the satchel hummed not with pride but pain. Not a sound, a presence, the soul of Medusa, still aware, still watching, still waiting. And though Perseus would battle beasts, save kingdoms, and carve his name into legend, he would never sleep the same. Because some nights, when the fire burned low, he heard it, a hiss beneath the bedroll. And in dreams, he saw not monsters, but a girl kneeling in a temple, asking for protection from the very gods who had abandoned her. When he returned to Serapis, windswept and armored, the people cheered. They saw a hero. They saw a victor. They saw the head of a legend hidden beneath his cloak. But they did not ask what it had cost. King Pollux laughed when Perseus entered, mocking, confident, unaware. "You brought me a gift," he sneered. Perseus nodded, "A token of your request." He opened the satchel, and for a single second, just one, the king met Medusa's gaze. That was all it took. Stone spread like frost over his skin. His voice cracked and died in granite silence. Pollux, once cruel, now cold, a statue in his own court, the room erupted. Some screamed, some knelt, some fled, and Perseus said nothing. Not of the girl in the cave, not of the mirrored reflection, not of the face that had not snarled but wept to them. She was a trophy, a weapon, a monster defeated. No one asked who she had been, but Perseus remembered. Always, still, the stories grew. Songs were sung, temples raised. Marble carved his name, etched in gold, never hers. Years later, by Athena's command, Medusa's head was placed upon her shield. Aegis, the face that once wept, now weaponized. Her power still dangerous, still sacred, but never hers to wield justice. They called it, but not for her, only for others. Even in death, Medusa served. Even in silence, she remained, a face of fear and forgotten faith. And Perseus, the golden hero, walked beneath that gaze for the rest of his life, winning battles with the eyes of the woman he had slain. He was loved, she was feared, and neither could change the roles the gods had written. After Perseus returned, his name echoed in song. The crowds praised him. The gods summoned him, but they did not call him to honor his courage. They wanted what he carried. Athena, calm as marble, asked. Not for the sword, nor the sandals, nor even the helm of Hades. She asked for the head of Medusa. And Perseus, loyal, silent, obedient, gave it to her with divine precision. Athena reached into the satchel and lifted. What once was a girl, a priestess, a survivor, she affixed it to her shield, the aegis, and with that, the transformation was complete. The face that once wept now snarled in frozen rage, cast in bronze, mounted on the goddess of war and wisdom. Wherever Athena marched, the world turned to stone, cities fell, legends rose, coins bore the aegis, temples immortalized it. But no one ever asked why Medusa had been cursed. No one whispered of Poseidon, of betrayal, of silence. Athena wielded the face of the woman she had punished, not in penance, not in remembrance, but as power, a symbol of what happens when mortals dare to bleed in divine spaces. Yet some whispered a different story, that Athena, in her wisdom, had carved Medusa into eternity, not as a warning, but as a reckoning, that by placing her on the aegis, she ensured that what the gods had done could never be forgotten, because deep within that petrified face, something endured. Memory, a protest, a truth that no blade could kill. And even as armies turned to stone, there were always a few, just a few who looked closely, and in her eyes, they didn't see a monster, they saw a girl who had once asked for protection. They saw what the gods could not. Time passed, centuries folded, and still her gaze bore witness to kings and conquerors, to temples and tyrants, to prayers and plagues, to silence and survival. They called her the Gorgon, the cursed, the monster, but in mountain shrines, in the corners of ruined temples, some remembered differently. A serpent made of clay, a lock of hair, a whisper, Medusa, not out of fear, but in mourning, in reverence, because long before she became a warning, she was a protector, a sanctuary in a world of predators, a spirit between hunter and hunted. And as her myth bent and twisted like the serpents in her hair, the truth remained. She was a woman, wronged, and she endured. A woman reshaped by pain. A woman whose story had been stolen, but whose stare could never be taken away. And so her gaze endured across paintings, sculptures, shields, coins, and dreams. And in every retelling, someone new would pause. Someone would ask, was she really the monster? And in that question, Medusa lived again. Centuries passed. Empires crumbled. New gods rose and fell. But Medusa endured, not as flesh and blood, but as symbol and shadow. Her face chiseled into marble, cast in bronze, migrated across cultures, in Byzantium, in Rome, in forgotten corners of the world. Her image lingered, just beneath the surface of myth and memory. But something strange happened over time. The tale began to split. In one version, she remained the monster, the Gorgon, the serpent-haired killer who turned men to stone with a glare. Her head became a talisman against evil, mounted above doors, gates, and armor. Soldiers carried her into war, hoping her legend would strike fear deeper than any spear. But another story quietly grew alongside it, one whispered by poets, by philosophers, by women whose voices rarely made it into scrolls. In this story, Medusa was not a beast to be slain, but a wronged woman punished for beauty, cursed for a crime committed against her. This version didn't roar, it murmured. It asked, why would a goddess of wisdom punish her own servant? Why did the god of the sea face no consequence? Why did so many men seek to kill her when she simply wanted to be left alone, in taverns, in libraries, in hidden corners of temples? These questions bloomed like weeds in cracks of marble, and slowly the image of Medusa began to shift again. She became a mirror, not of terror, but of truth. Women began to see themselves in her. Survivors of violence, victims of silence, souls forced to wear the label of monster simply for being feared. Her serpents were no longer a punishment, but a crown. Her eyes not a curse, but a defense, sharpened by betrayal. Even now, in modern tales and art, Medusa rises again, not to petrify, but to testify. She stares from paintings with grief and fury. Her story is retold, not to glorify Perseus, but to ask why he was ever called a hero at all. Because myths evolve, and sometimes the monster is not the one with fangs, but the one holding the sword. And in every generation that dares to question the old story, Medusa blinks just once and watches them begin to understand.